Deputies, please could you take your seats? Good morning. Good morning, deputies. Welcome to the meeting. Deputies, as you see from the Chanukiah behind me, we meet at Chanukah, and I'd like to wish all deputies Chag Chanukah Sameach. We light the candles tonight on the last night of Chanukah, and if any of you heard the canned muzak as you came up the stairs, which I thought sounded distinctly seasonal, like Christmas carols, I'm assured that it was in fact the Zemel choir, with a particularly individualistic rendition of Ma'atzur. I reflected this morning that Hanukkah was one of those times in 165 before the Common Era, when the superpower of the day was not just determined to enter the temple and defile it, like the Babylonians before them and the Romans after them, but they were going to go one step further, and that was to eradicate Judaism. And they could easily have succeeded. And it was one of those moments where the very existence of the Jewish people hung by a thread. And so it is with good reason that we celebrate our continuation now. And as I drove here this morning, past or near, public Chanukiahs in Boreham Wood, in Edgware, in Finchley, in Golders Green, in Hampstead, that was just on my route, and I reflected on the fact that the community had been out loud and proud to celebrate Jewish life in Trafalgar Square on Thursday, and on Tuesday we had lit the Hanukkah candles in the heart of government at number 10 Downing Street, and I thought we do have many reasons to celebrate Jewish life in Great Britain today. On a more negative note, I'm sorry to report that there has been continuing violence in Israel. The attacks are coming virtually daily now and are not even making the news. But the toll of those dead and injured is rising, and we must not be complacent about it. I welcome the fact that today is Israel Action Day, when collections are being made, including at the board and in shuls across London, of goods coming from Israel, which will be donated to needy people, the homeless and such like. And so we do two mitzvot in one. We support Israel and we support those less fortunate than ourselves. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome today and congratulate in public those 4 deputies who you elected additional members of the executive committee at the last meeting. And they are Ephraim Borowski, who I'm glad to welcome back to the board after a spell of ill health, Tal Ofer, Gabriel Weber, and Noemi Zell. I think they're all here today. Congratulations. I have a message from the family of Martin Frey, and I'm sorry that it has to be on a serious note, but this is what they wanted you to note. It has been a great comfort to the family to have so many deputies writing or emailing him with goodwill messages. I need to ask you to phrase the messages sensitively from now on in, because it's important that you understand that Martin, in fact, has a very severe condition. And wishing him a speedy recovery, I'm afraid, is no longer going to be appropriate. I have to advise deputies that Martin has been diagnosed with motor neurone disease, which is now at rather an advanced stage. And sadly, it is proceeding with considerable aggression and is debilitating to him. And I think probably it would be sensitive not to wish him a speedy recovery because, unfortunately, there are no current prospects of recovery. But it continues to be a great comfort to Martin and the family to know that people are thinking of him. And please, you're welcome to continue to write an email via Vivian's email address, which we can give you afterwards, or you can get from the board office. I can only wish Martin and Vivian well in the very, very difficult situation that is confronting them. I've also been asked to remind deputies that now that we're at the turn of the secular year, we need to ask deputies to continue to be helpful to us in ensuring that their congregations and constituencies pay the largest amount possible of community contribution. We are receiving good sums by way of the community contribution, but in some cases they are down, and occasionally markedly down. And Colin Spanjar is here to help you, and please feel free to talk to him, because it is the lifeblood of the board. And without that cash flow, to put it bluntly, of community contribution, the board services simply can't be offered. Turning now to my written statement, I'm delighted to see past President Vivian Weinman here, and I'm also very pleased to be able to wish Rosalind Pine Refuah Shalema in person. Richard Verber unexpectedly went into hospital this week with a condition which is treatable by medication, but he's been told to have some rest, and therefore we wish him Refuah Shalema, and we shall miss him today. And in his place to answer questions on the International Division report will be Vice Chair Edwin Shuker. Now I'm going to mention each of the subjects in the statement, and I'll take any questions on them. David Miliband, guest of honour at the board dinner. This is a coup for the board. It's attracting large amounts of interest. Please diarise the 11th of April. The tickets for the dinner will be in demand, and I hope that we will have many deputies able to come to the dinner, which will raise important funds for the board and raise our profile. Visit to Scotland. I want to take the opportunity to thank Glasgow Jewish Representative Council under its wonderful chair, Paul Moron, who I don't know if he's here today. I was told he was coming. He's here. Hello, Paul. Thank you for waving. And Paul Edlin and the management board, and also to Skojek, who arranged for me a thoroughly intensive 2 days in Scotland, and it was an important couple of days to meet a community quite far from London. I also take the opportunity to welcome to the board new deputy Dr. Harold Hammer from Newton Mearns, and I'm very glad that Dr. Hammer has made the journey here and hopes to make many more. We're always pleased to see deputies from regional communities. Any questions on Scotland? LSE. LSE. We're watching the situation there carefully. Marie has had some follow-up meetings, and I think LSE well understands that its reputation has been tarnished by these recent events. I'm very pleased that the offensive blog was taken down, because it was quite simply racist. Parliamentary Hanukkah reception. Natalie, did you have a question? On LSE, would you go to the microphone, please? Do we have a timetable today?
Natalie Shaw, Barnet United. We are aware Mr. President, of your intervention with regard to the Chancellor and the University, but we are further concerned by the follow-up actions by the Student Union President in response to the action taken by the University. And we wonder, what do you make of the LSE Student Union President complaining about the slew of lobbyists she considered responsible for LSE's decision to condemn the exhibition?
Vice President Marie van der Sar will answer that question.
I've got a meeting coming up in early January, so I will be able to report back to you further after that. So I think it's probably not very sensitive if I actually give an opinion now, but that is being actively followed up. So if you'll let me report back in January, but I fully take on the points. But that's my follow-up. Thank you.
Yes. Oh yes, the Labour. Yeah, okay. I'll do it then.
Darren Vanning, Barnet United Synagogue. It's on Hanukkah. So this year it was Mayor of London Boris Johnson lighting the menorah in Trafalgar Square. But next year it could be Mayor of London George Galloway lighting the menorah. With the mayoral elections coming up in the next few months, what will be the board's approach in general to the mayoral elections in terms of hustings, manifestos, etc., and in particular to the candidacy of Mr. Galloway?
Yeah, I don't think that was a question on LSE. It should have come at the end, but never mind. I'll do my best to answer it. The board does not comment on candidates for election. We live in a democracy. I was very pleased that Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith, who will be candidates for the mayoral election, were present at Trafalgar Square, which incidentally was organised mainly by the JLC and the London Jewish Forum. And in relation to the mayoral election, the London Jewish Forum will be doing most of the coordination work. Parliamentary Hanukkah reception, I don't think there are any... Yes? Yes, go ahead. Is that Talofer?
Talofer Chirkwell and Hainot Synagogue. I'm very happy that the President brought up the issue of the communal levy. I just wanted to ask him if he thinks it's going to encourage my constituents to pay the communal levy, knowing that Sir Gerald Kaufman was invited to the reception, and I think it was appropriate to invite him to the reception.
We invited members of Parliament some months ago, and in relation to all Jewish members of Parliament, incidentally, all members of Parliament, and certainly before Sir Gerald Kaufman made his remarks, I'm told that Sir Gerald slipped in, trousered a couple of donuts, and slipped out again very quickly, certainly before I caught sight of him. More seriously, we had a remarkable number of people who came, bigger and better than before, and they were united in their praise for the board. I think it's very important that we were able to have very productive discussions with, for example, the Scottish National Party, who are a strong force. They're the third force in Parliament, and they're beginning now to understand that some of the populist ideas they've had before may be met by better arguments. So that was also something emphasised to me in Scotland. It was also a good opportunity for us to hear from Tim Farron, head of the Liberal Democrats, who I was also able to meet in a private capacity earlier last week. Was there a question? Oh yes, Michael Reich, isn't it? Michael, this is on the Parliamentary Hanukkah reception, and you have got a question later.
I realise I have, but I assume I only have one opportunity to go to the stand, so I've got 2 points to make, if that's okay then. Okay.
I'll listen to them, yeah.
Okay, parliamentary reception. I understand the purpose of the parliamentary reception is to enable senior members of the Board of Deputies to meet with our parliamentarians, but we used to have a reception that was held at Portcullis House when many members of the board could meet together and that would include with the local MPs. Now, we wouldn't be in a position, I understand, to actually discuss major matters that the board executive might wish to put to the MPs, but it was a particularly good social event, bearing in mind the time of the year, and I think it would be very good if we could continue as a byproduct, if you like, from this reception, to still have such an event at this particular time of the year when we can all meet socially, and it would be particularly nice in an environment of the House of Commons or the House of Lords. So that's point number one. Shall I continue with the other one now, or shall I come back later for the other one?
Come back later.
Come back later. Thank you.
I think the event you referred to at Portcullis House is one, and it was just in a different location. The reality is we can't have the room or the resources to have what might be 200 plus deputies and those members of parliament, which is part of our parliamentary engagement strategy. We have to do what's practical. We try to invite as many deputies as possible, and those who've been 1 year will probably not get an invitation another year until their turn comes back around a year or two after that. But we just do our best with the resources and indeed the space that the parliamentary estate offers us. On this subject, Andrew? One moment. Andrew Gilbert's first, and then I
Yeah, Andrew Gilbert, UGIA. I wanted to take this, and also Darren Vanning's comments before. I wanted first of all to say that on Hanukkah, I think it's great that there is this the APPG reception, and congratulate the board. First of all, it's setting that up when people from the JLC and others did not want to see that APPG set up. But equally, I wanted to congratulate Adrian Cohen, the chair of the London Jewish Forum, on the work that was put into the Hanukkah in the Square. And also in the past, the Board of Deputies supported the Hanukkah in the Square. And I'd like to, and it's not just a JLC supported event, it's supposed to be supported by the board as well. So whilst I believe that next year Hanukkah in the Square might not take place because it's in the Christmas period, so and I'm quite sure that George Galloway won't be anywhere near us at any time, I would like to hope that in future Hanukkah in the Squares, the board, as well as supporting the Hanukkah reception, as well as supporting other activities, will give its support fully and financially to Hanukkah in the Square. And again, I want to commend Adrian Cohen, particularly in keeping the work together with Hanukkah in the Square, which he's done now for many years, as well as being a deputy. Thank you.
I'm happy to commend all those involved with Hanukkah in the Square. Many of us were there. It was a wonderful event. And I'm not going to be in any sense party political about this, and I don't need to be. In fact, the board was not invited this year to contribute financially towards Hanukkah in the Square. In the past, it has been quite a substantial financial expense on our limited resources. So I'm not in the least unhappy that we weren't invited to contribute this year. We were indeed there, and prominently there. Our stempel may not have been on the banner. You know what? I'm quite happy with that. I haven't got a problem with it. Yes?
Hi, Yakov Schmidt, West End Great Synagogue, also known as Dean Street, formerly Dean Street. A related comment with regards to the Hanukkah reception. You might remember then when we saw the Austrian ambassador back in July, he mentioned that he would be excited to have a Pesach Seder event. So I wanted to suggest, I know it's ahead of time, but perhaps we could plan that to have something like a mock Seder, obviously not a proper Seder, but a mock Seder for ambassadors and other non-Jewish guests. I think could be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaakov. When I remind my mother after Hanukkah that it's time to start thinking about Pesach, I get a very dusty answer indeed, but thank you for that suggestion. Ephraim? Can I remind deputies that because of time constraints, they probably only get one shot at the mic?
Well, I have to say everything all at one go then. First of all, thank you very much for your overwhelming welcome back. I didn't have my clapometer, so I didn't measure myself against Vivian Weinman. However, let me just draw attention to a couple of things. We're still talking about the item which is headed Parliamentary Hanukkah Reception. There is more than one parliament in this country. There was more than one Hanukkah parliamentary reception. In your earlier remarks, President, you said that there are collections taking place in communities across London today. There are communities outside London as well. We were very pleased to welcome you to Scotland last week. We hope you discovered how a civilized country is run. And I'm very grateful to you for remembering that your meetings were arranged by Skojec. And I would like to see that added to your written report. I have to say that my colleagues with whom I share your report regarded the absence of such a reference as insulting. That was the word that was used, and I share it with you. I also noticed that there is no report on anything else in Scotland in the reports from the divisions. And that is unfortunate because the entire work of the Defence Division, interfaith, group relations and everything else has to be duplicated, as I keep telling you, in Scotland. So if you want a question, sir, perhaps you could tell assembled deputies just exactly how much the board has contributed financially to the defence of the community in Scotland in 2015, of which there are maybe 2 weeks left.
Well, Ephraim, thank you for continuing my tone of not wishing to be party political. When Community Briefing referred to my meetings in Scotland and referred to Skojec, I got a note from the Glasgow Jewish Representative Council saying they felt insulted. Now that I've mentioned the Glasgow Jewish Representative Council in my written reports, I get Skojec telling me they feel insulted, so I give up. Any discussions about funding, I think, shall have to be asked of the Treasurer. But on a more serious note, I've expressed gratitude, of course, to both Glasgow Jewish Representative Council and to Skojec for assisting my meeting. I haven't, of course, in the least forgotten that there's another parliament in Edinburgh, but the parliamentary Hanukkah reception was a reception of the Parliament of the United Kingdom, of which I believe Scotland currently remains a part, and makes laws for all parts of this country, including, at the moment, Scotland. Meeting with Justice Minister Carolyn Dinenage. Thank you. Now to the written questions, which I hope I've answered. If those who've asked me the questions want to raise the supplementary, Talofer, is yours on your question, Joe? David Simmons. David.
David Simmons, Northwood and Pinner Liberal Synagogue. Thank you, Mr. President, for a prompt and positive reply. But I'd like to think that any discussions you have will form part of the discussions currently taking place to renew the charter of the BBC, which runs out next December. And if I can give you an example, the current charter, clause 6, paragraph 1 reads, "The BBC shall be independent in all matters concerning the content of its output, the times and manner in which this is supplied, and on the management of its affairs." And it wouldn't be beyond the wit of man to add a few words like, and no bias, political, racial, or religious. And therefore, this anti-bias would be bound as a contract that the BBC would have to respect and give good grounds for any correspondent breaching that to be reported to Ofcom and the necessary action taken.
David, thank you very much. I confirm I confirm that we will very much have in mind the politics surrounding and the renewal of the BBC's charter, and your point is well made. Thank you. Martin Jaskell? Is that Martin? Someone want to ask a question on Martin's question? Yes. Yes, go ahead.
Denise Lester, South Hampstead United Synagogue. Just a follow-up in relation to the BBC. And I say this against the context of being a former long-term contributor of Video Nation and being well aware of the BBC's charter in operation in terms of it should be independent and non-biased. The real issue, actually, it seems to me, is the issue internally of how news planning comes about, and in terms of coverage of both issues as they affect the Jewish community in this country and also the reportage of Israel, how issues are prioritised and then nuanced. And I just mentioned that in terms of your forthcoming meeting. So it's the whole news planning process, what the editors decide and how they're going to report. So, for example, you could have a report which deals with a general situation in Israel, but the first sentence will relate to the West Bank or Palestine rather than Israel, and there will be unequal news footage, and therefore you will have a nuanced perceived spin which is anti-Israel. So it's a subtle process, but a process nonetheless. And I personally think there ought to be a lot more education in terms of the overarching issues to assist the community both domestically and abroad.
Denise.
Thank
You're
you.
on amber. Thank you very much. Robert Sassoon, did you have a question?
Rob Sassoon, Deputy for Limud. Deputies should be aware that the annual Limud Conference, which is the largest Jewish educational event in Europe, will be taking place later this month in Birmingham. As the Deputy for Limud, I would encourage deputies to attend if possible, and there are still tickets available both for day places and for a 3-day residential stay. So I'd like to ask the President if he and his fellow HOs will be attending and speaking at Limud Conference this year, and also if, as in previous years, deputies could be informed as to the names and times of sessions that will be led both by the HOs and also by fellow deputies.
Again, that should have come at the end, but thank you, Robert. I'm very pleased to confirm that I shall be going, Gillian Meron, Chief Executive, is going, Marie van der Syle and Sheila Giewolb, and I'm almost certain Richard Verber, who was the chair of Limud, will be going. So the board will be fielding an almost complete team at Limud, and I absolutely endorse your encouragement to all of us and as many members as possible of the community to come to what is always a fantastically stimulating occasion. On Martin Jaskell's question, I can now advise the board that this week the board received an invitation for me and the Chief Executive to meet the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. The meeting has been scheduled for the second week in February. I will be happy to receive suggestions from the deputies through the office as to how to best to approach that meeting. Obviously, we will be planning for it with considerable care and aware of all the political ramifications, but I'm pleased to be able to confirm to deputies that we have been invited to have that meeting. And in case anybody isn't sure about this, as I've been reported as saying before, I will not shrink from raising matters of key concern to the community with Jeremy Corbyn, and if I feel concerned about any of the answers which he gives, and I'm not going to preempt now what answers he may or may not give me, I will have no hesitation in saying so and in speaking up for our community. Are those questions on this subject? All right, I think first on my right, I can't see, who's that? Yes, would you like to, and then Eleanor. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Oh, Martin, I'm sorry, Martin, it was you. I can't seem to hear it very well today.
I think, Mr. President,
could you
Martin Jaskell, Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue. I feel that you are sleepwalking like the Jewish communities did in the 1930s in treating with the devil. You are meeting someone who is the chairman of Stop the War coalition. How many? No, he's still a senior member. He still made a speech at their annual dinner. May I say that to have anything to do with people who spread anti-Israel and anti-Semitic propaganda as a core part or a core issue for them is, in my opinion, a mistake. I don't believe that you should treat with them the Labour and the Labour Party led by such an anti-Semite is not an organisation with whom we should.
Martin, can I please ask you? I had to have deleted from your question some words which I thought could possibly have legal consequences. You have just gone and spoken before I had the chance to stop you. Please will you immediately clarify, if you will, and I think you should, do not refer to people as anti-Semites unless you are prepared to justify it. And I think it would be mistaken, please. I think it would be mistaken to make that allegation about the leader of the Labour Party. It may be that he has come close to talking to people who have crossed the line into anti-Semitism, but I think your description of him was incorrect and unwise, and I think you should immediately acknowledge it now, because I would not like there to be any legal implications for you personally.
I will provide you with written evidence. And also to speak to someone who calls his friends Hamas and Hezbollah is in my opinion a mistake. I will provide you with written evidence of that on that subject.
Eleanor Lind.
Eleanor Lind, New London Synagogue. Mr. President, many years ago, the board had a delegation which included myself, I think the President, Henry Grunwald, I'm not sure, but certainly Flo Kaufman, and Jerry, to see our great friend, Ken Livingstone. In those days, Ken Livingstone was extremely rude to us. We looked at each other when he referred to Ariel Sharon as being like Milosevic, and we didn't walk out. We have regretted that ever since. May I just remind you to be very careful and walk out if you need to.
Paul Moron, and then Jonathan Davies. That's right, get to discussion.
Paul Moran, Glasgow Jewish Representative Council. Nice to be back after a few decades of absence. Mr. President, I think it's important for the Jewish community and for the leadership of the Jewish community not only to engage with our friends but to engage with those with different opinions to us. And I think we should, as a leadership of the Jewish community, have the confidence in ourselves to express our views. A year ago, just over a year ago, the Palestinian flag flew over Glasgow city chambers. But we met and did intensive work with the leader of Glasgow City Council. 1 year later, he's now joined as an active member of the Labour Friends of Israel, together with other senior councillors. We are shortly to engage and to meet with the head of the Green Party in Scotland, who's putting forward a lot of boycott and other unfavourable motions in Scotland. But we need to engage. He needs to hear our view. For too long in Scotland and elsewhere, the case for Israel has not been communicated. We must take that case out in order to influence. You mentioned earlier the work with the SNP. We've now seen something like 1/3 of the new members of Parliament from the SNP in the House of Commons. And already it is clear to us that opinions are shifting because for the first time they're being exposed to the pro-Israel case. This is important that we, as I say, we work not only with our friends, but those that need to hear our point of view.
Jonathan.
Jonathan Davis, Golders Green Synagogue. I can be brief because I agree with much of what has just been said a moment ago. I was worried in the first two contributions in this section because I would caution those people who suggest we should boycott the leader of the opposition. Oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. We do not know what will happen in the next 4 years, but it is possible, not because of anything Jeremy Corbyn does, but because of events, dear boy, events, and the world economic situation, that the coalition government could lose the next general election, and the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, could win it. And if we consider boycotting Mr. Corbyn, and my politics are fairly well known, I declare the interest as Vice Chair of Liberal Democrat Friends of Israel, but if we think of boycotting Mr. Corbyn, I can think of we're pointing a gun straight at our foot, which is most unwise. I would just take one issue with the gentleman from Scotland who preceded me. I hope when we meet Mr. Corbyn, we will not solely be putting the case for Israel, but we will, as the representative body of Anglo-Jewry, be raising all the issues of concern to the Anglo-Jewish community.
I'm very grateful for all those comments that have been helpful. I think deputies will have understood, got a good flavour of the issues from that discussion. I completely agree with Jonathan Davies. Israel is not the only matter on the agenda, but it's an important matter. I completely agree with Paul Moran, who put the points extremely well. I hope we're not talking in any sense about the need for walkouts. Listen, I think deputies know, and know from my on-the-record statements before, anyone who goes into a meeting with Jeremy Corbyn must go into that meeting with their eyes wide open, and I shall. This meeting will be something of an acid test as to how relations are going to be between the leader of the Labour Party and the Jewish community. I know it, he knows it. Please, we also remember that the Labour Party isn't only about one person. There are many different groupings in the Labour Party, some of whom have their own particular views about its current leadership. We had some senior members of the Labour Party, including the deputy leader, at the parliamentary reception, who would have said very different things. So these are all difficult issues which we need to balance and consider, and we shall. But thank you very much for those very helpful comments. Gary Abrams, question about the Palestinian Authority. Moving on then, Joe Millis. Oh, Joe, you had a question. That's a surprise.
Yeah, I kind of fear, Joe Millis, Bromley Reform. I kind of fear that you might have grasped the wrong end of the stick. I was not referring to Mick Davis's excellent piece in the tablet. I was referring instead, and this is in the first question, to the fact that the JLC appears to be storming ahead both organisationally and by way of its modus operandi. The board, on the other hand, appears to be wilting into insignificance. I sometimes have the heretical thought of wondering what on earth it is for. Apart, that is, for being sometimes a cheerleader for the Israeli government and its policies. Which brings me to my second question. You say the view you express is consensual. There is no consensus on Israel in this community. In fact, it's probably best that we leave the issue of Israel at the door when we have communal discussions on any subject. The level of debate has deteriorated and has become so toxic that it's sometimes unbelievable. Just look at Keith Khan Harris's book, Uncivil War, or perhaps the Twitter feeds of some of our esteemed members here, to see just how bad this has become.
You're on amber, Joe.
Thanks, I know what that colour is. Cognitive dissonance, as they wrote in the JC this week, may allow us to kid ourselves for a while. Remember those words, because I think the board is suffering from cognitive dissonance. Thank you very much.
I find it ironic that in a speech that was devoted to talking about toxic debate at the board, there was that, frankly, ill-mannered remark towards me, Joe, and frankly, it affected the credibility of what you said on everything. I wanted to point out, I'm sorry, I won't be heckled at. Please sit down, Joe. You've had your chance. Every single month you ask 2 or 3 questions that make me wonder whether we're inhabiting some sort of parallel universe. I wanted to say that under my presidency, I wanted to say how much better I thought debates had got, including about Israel. Because here at this board, we talk to each other, and we must talk to each other, with a certain degree of mutual respect and understanding, even if we don't agree with each other. Can I say once again, it's so obvious, we have so much more that unites us than divides us. And we're certainly not going to be divided on Israel in the face of all the people out there whose visceral opposition to Israel completely overtakes any sort of policy differences that we might have. I expressed, in answer to your second question, what was so obviously the communal consensus from the reaction of deputies at the last meeting. But on your first question, I think, Joe, you may have been a bit misled by the figures in that rather idiosyncratic article in the Jewish Chronicle. Here's a fact for you. The Board of Deputies has 16 or 17 full and part-time employees, and the JLC has, I think, 3. The figures about the JLC included all the various satellite bodies like Pages and others. In fact, the chief executive of the JLC had to write a letter to all the members of the JLC to explain how misleading that report was. The JLC's number of staff has in fact shrunk over previous years. So, but if you're coming out with some other premise, such as the JLC being better suited to dealing with the challenges of the 21st century, I venture to say to you, Joe, I couldn't possibly agree with that. I think in terms of our resources and our activities and our news stories and the breadth of our reach and the width of our reach and the confidence with which we approach it, and above all the democratic legitimacy and accountability which this body has and no other body has, it's very clear to me which bodies in the community are best suited to dealing with the challenges of the 21st century. And in saying that, I mean no lack of respect or ill manners or manners towards the JLC, whose contribution I also value as part of the great communal mosaic of Jewish community in the United Kingdom. Jerry, is it on this issue?
Jerry Lewis, Hampstead Synagogue. Far be it from me to put in a discordant note.
What did he say?
Since you've taken over, sir, things have improved. Of that there is no doubt. And you and I have had one or two private discussions to that effect. The thrust of Joe Millis's comments, I won't comment on. The basic fact remains there is a widespread perception in the community that the JLC are now running circles around the board. And if you read the report that you referred to, you'll see they are about to appoint 6 regional representatives. They have a budget to deal with it. They're taking on a top-class person from Tesco to deal with their comms. The board are not up to scratch at the moment, and it's not reflecting on the staff. But because of the way the board was run down in the last 6 years, 3 of which I was part of the system, but I was critical of it, I will say to you, sir, that there is a major job to be done by us deputies. And that brings me on to the main thrust of what I want to say. It has become apparent, sir, that there have been no executive meetings for the last 2 months. It's always been in the board's constitution and custom and practice for the board to have an executive meeting before each board plenary. Why is it important? Because between each plenary,
you're on amber, Jerry.
I'm well aware, we, us deputies, expect the executive to look after our interests. It is wrong, sir, for the board not to have the executive checking what's going on between plenaries. For whatever reason, could you please, under the board's constitution, report to us any presidential action you have taken which has yet to be reported to the board? I put it into the board's constitution to say that that should be done on a regular basis. Final point I say is this, to Martin Jaskell and to others, with regard to Jeremy Corbyn, I won't speak again today unless I have to. Please be aware, he is definitely not, repeat not, I've known the guy 20 years, not anti-Semitic. He may be critical of Israel. We must not put those two things together. If we do that, we're making a very major mistake. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't accept the Eeyore-ish attitude behind a lot of that, Jerry. It's fairly familiar theme coming from you. I don't share it. You're absolutely entitled, of course, to your views. The JLC has made it clear that it regards itself now as an enabling organisation to help its members do better. I don't necessarily regard the fact that it may be taking on more resources and staff as a bad thing if they're going to be used for general communal purposes. I enjoy a solid working relationship with the leadership of the JLC, and I hope that can continue. And I hope that if they do employ regional representatives, then we will be able to use them for the whole benefit of the community, including for the defence of Israel, which is sorely needed. But I've no doubt at all, from my contacts with people up and down the country, that they are rather puzzled about what the JLC does, but they're increasingly in no doubt about what the board is doing. Thank you for your remarks on Jeremy Corbyn, and I will take some other questions on this matter. Robert Stone. Oh, well, thank you, Jerry. I've forgotten. The executive meeting, the executive was not complete until the election of the 4 deputies I mentioned. We've had an executive meeting already, and the next one will take place just before the next board meeting in January.
Thank you, Mr. President. Robert Stone, Finisher Reform Synagogue. Since Mr. Lewis picked up the question of the Labour Party again, you may have noticed I was late for that debate on the Labour Party, as are several deputies. This is because the Metropolitan line was held up by 40 minutes by a signal failure in Baker Street. This is clear evidence of an anti-Semitic attempt by the Transport for London to sabotage this organisation.
Thank you very much. Oh, I was going to say to deputies that while I do appreciate the additional courtesy being accorded to me by being called sir, It really isn't necessary, but thank you very much to all those deputies who are. I prefer not to encourage it. Can I move on to the next question, if I may? There's Mark Fox's question. Thank you. Ruth Friedman. Gabriel Webber answered the question. Howard Urdinas. Howard, I've got something to add to your. There's quite a long answer to the question from Howard Urdinas, Deputy for Pinner, about additional deputies that I hope you'll find helpful. And he asked a further question about how many contested elections there were in the last 2 board elections over the last 6 years. And I have to say to Howard, I'm really sorry, but our system does not allow us to know that. We'd have to go through every single return, and even then we might not have the information. It would be a substantial task. I can tell you from anecdotal evidence that a solid proportion of elections across constituencies were indeed contested, and I would like to see that number rise further. Was that a further question from over there? He's not here. Well, I thought he wasn't here. Thank you. Thank you. I'll tell him that I've answered his questions, though. Thank you. David Farby. Michael Reich. Michael, can I say to you, what Michael's question is, I have allowed it in, Michael, on this occasion, although it was more in the nature of an advertisement for the Mosaic Communities 10th of January event. I will allow it this time, and you got away with it, but I will say to deputies, we won't in future be allowing presidents the question to add as a, however elegantly, concealed form of advertisement. You will find instead the highlighted upcoming events in the Deputy Information for Deputies email that's sent out in between board meetings. Michael, are you still going to have another attempt?
I am indeed, Mr. President. Michael Reich, Mosaic Reform. First of all, I would like to thank very much the fact that this has been promoted very well by the Board of Deputies in the monthly figures that come out. I did put this in. Limud have just provided an advertisement for themselves without putting in a question beforehand. I just wanted to say that this particular event concerns not just the Jewish community. We are trying to look at the situation as how all communities are protected, Jewish, Christian and Muslim communities, and in particular for those people who don't know, Fayez Magul, who started he's the Director of Faith Matters, is going to be present, and he is an excellent person to help the Jewish community as he directly, on behalf of the Muslim community, fights anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So I'd hope that we will see as many people from here there, and please, if you are going to come, the details are shown in the in the monthly briefing that's being sent out, and please contact the local administrator at Mosaic Reform. And thank you for the advertisement.
No, we're half now. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions for me? We've got probably no more than 5 minutes. I'll be very happy not to take up 5 minutes. Good, excellent. Thank you very much indeed, deputies. You've had the minutes of the previous board meeting on the 15th of November. The office has, I think, not been notified of any revisions to those minutes, so I'm going to take them as a correct record. Thank you very much indeed. Now, in your papers, item 4 of the agenda is an application UK for representation on the board, and in the absence of Tony Leifer, chair of the Constitution Committee, I asked Jeremy Friedman if he could just chair that application, because it needs your consideration and a vote. Jeremy.
Thank you, President. You have been circulated by Tony Leifer with a summary about Mizrahi's application. Mizrahi is a name which carried and had carried great weight at one time, and the organization certainly diminished in stature. But on examination, the Constitution great deal more information about its resurgence into Anglo-Jewish life and its intentions over the next couple of years. And then, as you will see from the notes, has no hesitation unanimously in recommending that you should approve its admission. The voting requires a 2/3 majority of those present and voting.
Say something? Past President Lionel Kopelovic. I'm sorry, Jerry, please will you give way to the microphone too?
Well, thank you, President. I'm not against this at all. What I would say is this, that the amount of paper sent out in respect to this application is tremendous and totally unnecessary. All that we required was that there should have been a note from the Constitution Committee. The committee notes that this application meets all the requirements of the Constitution and therefore recommends it to the board, full stop. That was all that was required. We don't need all these extra pages which are put in, which people don't download anyway, and I would therefore ask that we bear this in mind in the future. Now, as you only give people one shot at the microphone, may I also mention this, President? We are rather surprised that no longer, when we get the minutes, do we get the number of deputies who have been present at the meeting, which we always had in the past. There's no mention of the numbers of deputies present. And secondly, in the activity reports of the divisions, we always got the date when the meeting took place, and we also got mentioned the names of those who were present. Neither of these now take place at all. One of the vice presidents told me, we haven't got time to put this in any longer because there's so much to put in the paper. But I suggest really that a lot of these reports could be compressed anyhow. In fact, I've noticed that one particular item appears twice, once in the report of the Defence Group, and the second time in the report of the Community Issues Division. So perhaps you would bear this in mind. But meanwhile, I go back to what I said previously. Let's put the thing to the vote, and that's the end of it.
Point of order, Mr. President.
One moment, please. I'll take any contributions about Ms. Rachi. I really don't welcome people coming to the microphone and having more than one shot at it by compressing it all in one speech. It's not really going to be a good idea. Jerry, you've already spoken.
It's a point of order, it's not a speech. May
Well,
I put it to you?
Jerry,
May I put it to you, Mr. President?
I'll try it on, but let it be quick, please.
It is directly relevant because it's a breach of the Constitution we're dealing with. And simply to point out to you, as I have now double-checked with two esteemed deputies, this is not necessary. Ms. Rachi used to be part of the board. They have full membership. They haven't taken up their seats, but we don't need to vote on this again. They were part of the board and had played a very historic role in the board. This is a totally irrelevant application. And I would suggest to you, Mr. President, it ought to be left on the table. They should be entitled to their place as it was. Thank you.
I'll let Jeremy respond to that.
I am not aware that Ms. Rachi has been a continuing member of the Board of Deputies. Their application was considered, and if I may, with respect, say to the former President, Lionel, it was a single-page recommendation. All the rest of it was Ms. Rachi's information about what their intentions are and their programme. If I may answer the second question, there are 123 deputies present at the moment. They may not all, of course, choose to vote, but if they do, 82 votes in favour of the resolution are needed. Thank you.
Could I ask deputies now to vote, please? Jonathan, is it really necessary?
Yes, because in the past we didn't used to have votes every time somebody...
It's Jonathan Goldbloom.
Jonathan
Could you
Goldbloom. Speak, merci, Gedas. In the past, we did not have this. This is not the procedure that was in the past. In the past, if the Constitution Committee approved it, then it was approved unless there were objections. So is this
Thank you, Jonathan.
a new procedure, in which case it should be done every time, or on what basis have we changed the procedure?
Thank you, Jonathan. That's not correct. In fact, we always go through the constitutional procedure. I'm now going to ask people... Thank you, Jonathan. I'm now going to ask people to vote on the recommendation of the Constitution Committee that Mizrahi UK be admitted for representation on the board. Those in favour of Mizrahi UK's admission, please show your green cards. Thank you. Those against, please show your red cards. Any abstentions? There are 3 abstentions which record, and I think I can say, Jeremy, that the vote will be affirmative, passed easily by the 2/3 majority. Can I also respond to the past President, Lano Koplovitz? Lano, you're quite right to this extent. I will endeavour to ensure, and those members of the board's team are listening, that in the minutes they will record how many deputies were present. In relation to the activity report, please note that one of the reforms we've brought in is to have each division giving a report on activities for each board meeting, rather than you only hearing a much longer report twice a year. And I think every deputy that I've spoken to, and we've had many unsolicited comments, thinks this is a great improvement. But I'll tell you what I will think we could try to do, and I will encourage it to be done, that there is a note at the foot of the report which records what meetings took place during the period of 1 month, and who attended them. If it can be feasibly done, then that's what we will do, and I thank you for raising it. Right, any particular order? We're going to go now to the divisional... You happy to go first? Yeah. To the divisional reports, and they'll be followed by workshops, and we're running so far nicely to time, and the workshops, therefore, I want to leave really enough time to have a really good workshop, because we've been squeezed for time in the past. I'm going to ask Sheila Giwald to present the activity report of the Community Issues Division. Please treat the report as read, and it'll just be for questions to the Chair. Sheila.
Yes, thank you. Has anybody any questions at all about anything in the report? I'm happy to take any questions, not necessarily going through it piece by piece, but has anybody got anything they'd like to ask or comment upon? Please. Okay, we are having a volunteer workshop afterwards. If anybody's interested in learning more about how they can volunteer, specifically with the educational aspect of the Jewish Living Exhibition, school visits and school tours.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your...
Thank you. I'll ask Stuart now to introduce the F&O Division report.
My assumption is that there are no questions. As ever, any granularity, because I can read your mind, Rosalind. That's why I love you so much. But seriously, and no assembly is complete without my saying hello to you. If anyone has any questions at the level of detail, please by all means get in touch. And if there is a question, please fire away.
Mervyn Smith Sutton. I raised dissatisfaction at the Woolley reports issued by the previous Treasurer at various plenary meetings. I've still not seen a dicky bird with regard to any information in respect of income detailed expenditure or progress so far as finance is concerned.
With all due respect, why don't you just come along to an F&O meeting and you will see that we provide a level of granularity that has elicited 0 complaints.
I'm not
for any
asking
organization.
for myself
I'm not going to circulate all our
personally.
information.
I believe that all deputies are entitled to that information. The only information that I have actually seen is by Simon Rocker, and I don't know how he's privy to the information as separate from the deputies, where he knows the reduction in the board's income, which fell to 895,000 in 2014 from 1.167 million previous year and 1.255 million in 2011. The information that was put forward in a response by Lawrence Brass was his very bullish statement that income had increased. And this was in February of this year. Now, this isn't Stuart's fault or Stuart's problem, but it is something that hopefully will be addressed. And I still find no reason whatsoever why basic information is not provided to deputies with regard to what is happening, particularly when statements have been made by the previous treasurer, which are obviously, apparently, incorrect. If I could make one point...
Mervyn, you're on amber.
Fine, I'll make one point which is separate from that, and that relates to Joe Millis, which expresses high ignorance with regard to what's happening in Israel, and I would recommend to everybody that they take the opportunity to read Catch the Jew by Tuvia Tenenbaum, which will reflect on the enormous sums of money paid to NGOs specifically for the purpose of debasing Israel.
You know, fabulous questions. I'll just repeat my invitation. If it moves you that much, come to the F&O meetings. They are open. We are currently looking at the draft budgets for next year. They are being looked at by the F&O. There's already been a presentation to the F&O, and in the new year, by the time that we get together again in the new year, we will have collated questions from the F&O, which will then be considered by the trustees, the HOs, and hopefully we will have a budget that will have been cleared, and then the detail will be open to you. In the meantime, it's not best practice in any organization to start circulating granular information when we're still dealing with stuff at draft stage. As for the article in the JC, I wasn't spoken to in advance, and it was drawing on information from the past, not the present. The report and accounts of the board were in the public domain. I think that was the primary source of Simon Rocker's article. And as I say, if you want granularity on an interim basis, get in touch with me offline, come to an F&O. They're very open meetings. And I don't think anyone from the F&O has any plaints about the level of detail that we're providing at that level. But we are at draft stage at the moment. That's all.
Thank you. I then will turn now to the international division. Deanna, did you have a question on the F&O? Go on then.
Okay, Deanna, thank you.
It's to do, Diana Levine, Deputy for B'nai B'rith UK. Just wondering if the Board of Deputies are getting involved with the admissions policies of Jewish schools, because there's a consultation going on at the moment about Yavne and JCOS, which will affect Clor Shalom from year 5 and HJPS, which are feeder schools. Are you involved with this?
Sarah Perlmutter, who's our education manager, is involved. We actually don't influence admissions policy. It is part of the school's work that they do. The board doesn't have any influence, but we are engaged with them. We are here to help and advise them.
And could you send me details of what's going on in this respect? Or ask your colleague to do so?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult one, Deanna, because we're not actually responsible for their policy. The board, if you want to email me separately, I can forward your inquiry to Sarah and she can give you as much information as she is allowed. I hope that's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I think if I can help, Deanna, if you go online to the website of Yavne College, you'll find their consultation document. And if you go online to the website of HJPS, I suspect, but I haven't looked at it myself, that you will find that they have published a letter in response to the consultation. And I think you'll find all the information you need there, and this is not something that the board deals in. And I say that despite my own very obvious connection with HJPS from the past. Edwin Chuka.
I joined the President, and I'm sure the rest of the meeting, in wishing Richard Verber refuah shalema. He's been ordered to sit in bed, but I can assure you that Motzei Shabbat, he was on the phone already discussing agendas and way forward. So that's our Richard, and we wish him a speedy recovery and hope to be with us very, very soon. I'm happy to present the International Division's report on his behalf, on behalf of the division, and answer any questions that I could. Sir.
Spencer Nathan, Bournemouth Hebrew Congregation. Mr. President, I kept to the rules and did not put a question to you, which was an advertisement. So I'd like to mention now a session that's taking place on Wednesday the 13th of January on the Jews of the Ukraine. I'd like to thank Richard Verber for helping Edgware United to arrange this event. Very important. We care about the Jews of the Ukraine. A delegation of rabbis, you probably have seen in the Jewish Chronicle, has just come back and reported on the problems the Jews are facing there. On the 13th of January, we're going to revise the poster that we've sent to you. Previously, we were going to have a Skype link. The lady who was going to be on the Skype link is now going to be in the country at the time. And we also have a speaker from World Jewish Relief's the program's performance advisor, who will be giving the lecture. And we're hoping to have one of the rabbis who came back from the Ukraine this week also on the program. So please let your congregations know about this event. We'll be sending out a revised poster this week. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Avril Lappin, Allerton Hebrew Congregation, Liverpool. I see that you had, or that Gillian and Stephen Jaffa had a meeting with senior executives at Sky News to discuss the reporting. Sky News, obviously, this has been a matter of great concern. And I wonder if you could just elaborate as to how you felt this meeting went and what sort of response you had.
Great. Yeah, sure. I'm going to ask my colleague Gillian to report, since she was in the meeting herself.
As you'll have seen in the report in our community briefing and also in the Jewish media, it was a helpful meeting indeed. It gave us the opportunity to explain how the community feels, how, for example, where headlines are not put as, I'm being very delicate, as well as they should be, the effect that they have. I'd say it was a constructive meeting, and in particular what came out of it is Sky are very keen to cement the relationship with the board, and indeed we are going to be organising to meet all their key people in the new year, which I think will absolutely help with a far greater understanding and enable us to work with Sky as we will be working with other media outlets in terms of their reporting. So a constructive meeting, and I think dealt with in an honest and open environment.
Okay. I just want to mention that at the division we are experimenting with a creative way of dividing the elected members into dynamic subgroups, with which some of them are permanent and charged with strategizing our approach, and others are formed around pressing issues. Each of these subgroups select a coordinator, choose their own method of communication with each other, consult key organizations, check out best practices, and co-opt deputies from outside the division if appropriate. So you may expect a call for assistance on our work. And I think the board and the division will feel this new creative way of working within the next few months, as we will be reporting straight from grassroots and with action plan. And thank you for listening to our report, and I hand over back to the President.
Thank you very much indeed. I will then turn to the Defence and Group Relations Division. Marie.
I'm not sure if I'm meant to say this, but Diana, I'm very sympathetic about the school's position because I'm in the process of applying to the Jewish schools for my daughter. So I fully understand how difficult it is, particularly as she didn't go to a Jewish primary school. So it's hard. Turning to the report, I'm delighted to take any questions. We do have a workshop straight after this where we can discuss any detail of anything that anyone particularly wants to talk about, maybe perhaps the situation at LSE or something else. But in the meantime, has anyone else got any questions? Thank you.
Gosh, okay. Thank you very much indeed, Deputies. We can now move to the workshops, and I think given that we are running, it's not a crime to end a board meeting early. So all right, I'll let you in just a moment, if I may. And Janet.
Janet Tresman, Finchley Progressive Deputy. Not anything to do with Jeremy Corbyn at all. To do with the workshops, Mr. President, it seems to me that they're such a great, innovative thing that we're doing now, but after the workshop, everything peters out. And we just go off. I think we ought to have a report back, at least from each of the workshops, and a formal farewell, because people may have questions to raise. And I know it takes time, but it does seem to me a damp squid at the end of the plenary.
Okay. Thank you very much. Workshops have proved popular. What I was about to say was that we'll meet in workshops commencing in a moment. We'll take the four corners of the room, and those who are going to lead the workshops will take up their stations. I won't tell them where to go. I'll leave that to them to decide, and you join them. We'll plan to complete the workshops, shall we say, by about 1:10. And I fully understand and take on board the point you just made, Janet. I'm inclined to, for deputies, do like time for talking and networking, and I'm not sure it is a damp squid, but I'd like to consider that with my colleagues, if I may, and think about how it's working, because we're evolving as a board. That's how we do things. We've definitely made some improvements, and we'll listen to those comments and continue to try and improve. So I shall take any further items under any other business at this stage for a very short time. Bernard Silver, I'm going to let first. Joe, forgive me for a moment, because you've had, and that will be followed by, what's the name at the back? Someone tell me. Yes, and then
whoever will announce themselves, I'm sure.
Marilyn Travato after that, and then Joe.
Bernard Silver, Western Marble Arch Synagogue. I'm delighted that we've got any other business at the end of the agenda. We dropped that years ago, and it gives us an opportunity to raise anything we want. This has probably been the shortest plenary on record, just 1 hour and a quarter by my watch, the whole meeting has taken. And I don't know quite how this has happened, because we used to meet at 10 o'clock years ago, then it became 10:15, and eventually it's drifted, and now it's 11:15. And now we're squeezing everything in to such an extent that you're always saying, we're rushed for time, we're rushed for time. The 4 minutes allowed for each speaker under the Constitution has now become 3 minutes. 2.5, thank you very much. But with the board has never agreed that. And I also find it very odd that you, Mr. President, feel it necessary not just to preside over these proceedings, but to respond to everything that's said. And also that constantly we're being asked for questions. If you look in the Constitution, we're allowed to speak on subjects, and we never seem to have a debate on anything these days. And it seems to me that the board, if people are saying it's becoming irrelevant, I don't think it is. I think it's never been more needed or more important. I was amazed today that there was nothing said about the attack on yeshivas who seem to be operating illegally. There was nothing on Donald Trump. There was nothing on all sorts of things that we would normally have expected to have at a plenary. But if I may, I'd like to suggest that whoever is responsible starts looking again at the way they used to be, and I just think they were actually better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Marilyn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Marilyn Travato, Leeds. I hope I'm wrong about this, by the way. So this is regarding the highly topical subject of synagogues and Jewish schools security. So deputies will have read that back in March, Prime Minister David Cameron allotted a governmental contribution of £11 million. And this was £7 million towards additional safety measures for Jewish schools and £3 million for security guards outside synagogues. This, of course, was in the wake of the Paris and Copenhagen atrocities. So, is there any possibility of knowing how this money was distributed, either by direct grants for schools and shuls, or via the CST? That's the first little part. Further, would the board executive endorse the drawing up and distribution of a comprehensive set of security guidelines for schools and shuls? Could the relevant sections be provided for as congregants, individual congregants, both for their own protection and so that they can play a role in the security themselves of this particular situation?
Marilyn, your time's up, I think. Thank you. You've had asked two separate questions.
Can I just say the last bit? These considerations apply to us all now, and also monthly meetings. For example, have we all been briefed on exactly what to do if an emergency situation, God forbid, occurred? Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
I don't know if people are aware, this is from reading the Hebrew press, that an Israeli officer, I think, was detained briefly for several hours at Heathrow Airport by the police because he was allegedly involved in war crimes in the last war in Gaza. I'm just wondering if the board has had words with the Foreign Office about this and what steps are going to be taken to prevent this happening in future. I raise this because I know many soldiers, relatives in fact, who served in the last war in Gaza and may find it quite difficult to get into this country again. I too served in Lebanon in '82. I might be in trouble. The other thing is, I don't know what I said to offend the President, and if I did, I'm terribly sorry. But again, if the President would like to tell me what it is exactly was ill-mannered in what I said, I'd be happy to hear. Thank you.
On a general point, I think I'll take AOB off the agenda. It should best be covered by any supplementary questions to me, I think. Otherwise, I think we're going to have a sort of drag effect at the end of the meeting. And all those points which were raised were good points and could have been, might better be raised then. I'm very happy to talk to you, Joe, of course, in time. I've not heard of any such incident that took place at all. If I'm given more information, I'll look into it. Marilyn, all those things you mention are absolutely within the province of the CST. The CST do provide briefings about the current situation and training, and they are the board's security organisation, specialists in it. They're extremely good at their job, and I think you're based in Leeds, and there's a CST Northern Office, which I think runs out of Manchester for Leeds. I'm sure they'll be delighted to pass you their information. Some of it is online indeed, current briefing documents, and they are the people who are responsible for this and not the board. I do ask members of the board to heed the recent information which you should have had to reproduce in various communal publications, that we are at a time of heightened security. Bernard, I don't agree with you about debate. We've had some really good debates at the boards since I became the president on quite a number of issues, including relations with the Labour Party, including on labelling last month, and we've had some good conversations today. I have to admit to you that if someone doesn't ask me a question, then I won't necessarily respond, because I don't regard myself as a fount of all wisdom on every matter under the sun, including candidates for the Republican nomination of the office of President of the United States of America. And there are some matters which I actually might deliberately choose not to comment on, because I think they won't necessarily help the communal climate or the debate, but you can always have a quiet word with me afterwards. And now, if I can suggest, can we get to workshops until 1:10, 1:15, and I will be not doing a workshop, but I will be around if anyone would like to have a word with me informally, and I hope to sit in on some of the workshops as well. And I'm not in the least apologetic that we've had a shorter meeting, but it includes the workshops as part of the meeting. Thank you all very much indeed. Happy Hanukkah.